The Legend of Heroes Trails Through Daybreak 2 is everything I could imagine in a sequel, as it's more of what I enjoyed in the first game, but amped up in many ways I didn't see coming. The country of Calvert sets the stage for one of the best RPGs I've experienced in recent memory, and many of its intriguing but contentious attributes make Trails Through Daybreak 2 stand out from the rest of the Trails series thus far. I thoroughly enjoyed the tonal shift that Trails Through Daybreak brought to the series, and Trails Through Daybreak 2 nails that point further by introducing a murder mystery that links together many narrative threads. Trails Through Daybreak 2 improves the core Daybreak gameplay systems while bringing a vastly different approach to story structuring. The sudden appearance of the Crimson Grendel, the return of a fan-favorite pair from Trails into Reverie, and the virtual Marhen Garden dungeon certainly piqued my interest for the story in the hands-off previews. In addition, I was once again surprised by what Falcom was capable of, thanks to a certain new mechanic, where Trails Through Daybreak serves as an incredible introduction to Van Arkwright in the country of Calvert. Trails Through Daybreak 2 is the game that really solidifies the Calvert Ark's place in the Trails series. I knew about the Crimson Grendel well before even starting Trails Through Daybreak 2, but I was still surprised to see how gruesome and menacing such a beast of an antagonist can be. Trails Through Daybreak 2 starts out with the monster killing a squad of Calvert's special forces, with blood spurting all over the scene. The Crimson Grendel is led by a red hollow that looks very similar to Mare, adding even more mystery into the equation. Hot on the trail of his monster is Swin Abel and Nadia Rain, the 3 and 9 pair that people fell in love with in Trails into Reverie. Immediately, I knew Trails Through Daybreak 2 was going to touch on many different characters and happenings in Calvert, and I was locked in to see it happen. Back in Edith's old town, returning protagonist Van Arkwright enjoys some sleep in his office, and Trails Through Daybreak 2 proceeds in a manner that is reminiscent of the previous game. This time, Elaine Auclair, Van's old flame and the most renowned bracer in Calvert, visits him for a request he cannot deny. Due to the Crimson Grendel's murder spree and the events of the past year, Calvert's Central Intelligence Department will potentially pin the incident on Van and arrest him since he has similar powers. While the rest of Arkwright Solutions is handling their own personal matters, Van is thrust back into the limelight as an interconnected story unfolds. Players will progress the prologue of Trails Through Daybreak 2 with Van and Elaine as the main party members as they seek to find and apprehend the Crimson Grendel. Without delving too deep into spoilers, Trails Through Daybreak 2 pulls off something very bold in the early hours and introduces a mechanic that allows you to rewind time in order to reach a different outcome. I'm all for time rewinding as a science adventure fan, so I found this to be a very intriguing element for a Trails game, and it avoids being a catch-22 in this case too. Since the time mechanic is present, Van and the crew will discover many revelations by unfortunately meeting the worst fate possible several times over. This element adds much more to the dark narrative and themes that the Calvert arc aims to portray, and there were definitely scenes that shocked and surprised me. The story is also handled similarly to Trails into Reverie during some of the acts, as parties will progress down their own paths in order to discover clues, reignite with old allies, and get one step closer to the Crimson Grendel. The first half of the game also includes helpful refreshers on the lore of Zemuria, including Renbright's backstory in the Gardens, in order to prep players for what's to come. There are some slower paced story segments that may seem out of place at first glance, but Trails Through Daybreak 2 manages to make everything come full circle. Trails Through Daybreak's field and command battle systems are back with quality of life improvements and new features. Once again, you can release shards to enter a command battle, and it's advantageous to do so after stunning enemies in field battles. Characters can now cast arts in field battles by holding down triangle or any other equivalent button per your configuration, and you can unleash a cross-charge attack if you perfectly dodge an enemy's attack. Doing a cross-charge will swap to the indicated party member in the prompt, and the attack is capable of stunning enemies. EX chains are another new addition to Trails Through Daybreak 2, allowing two characters to perform their crafts together in a very powerful attack. EX chains can be unleashed by activating a craft or normal attack with the linked party member to trigger SCLM, typically when shard boosts are activated. It's quite useful when wanting to grind and clear enemies, and it can yield plenty of bonus XP as well. There's more drivers, arts, quartz, and holocores than ever before in Trails Through Daybreak 2 as well. As a result, there's much more variety in each character's orbments. The new dual arts are very powerful as well, allowing characters to exploit enemy weaknesses even further. Overall, Trails Through Daybreak 2's combat is more refined and doesn't fix what isn't broken. Field combat is flashier this time too, thanks to the improvements and additions. If you're a completionist or want the best party setup possible, you will be spending a lot of time in the Marhen Garden. This dungeon exists in a virtual space developed by the Marduk Security Company, And it does take some cues from the Reverie corridor in terms of scenery and level traversal. Although it doesn't have any sort of story episode-like elements from Trails in a Reverie or Trails in the Sky the Third, you can unlock some great bonuses and partake in minigames at your leisure in the Marhen Garden. Each floor of the Marhen Garden contains areas with simple objectives to complete, such as taking down a certain number of enemies or disarming objects on the field. New floors are unlocked as you progress the story, and there are more than plenty of them to complete for rewards like quartz, equipment, upgrade items, and consumables. You can also earn plenty of S tokens in and out of Marhen Garden, which can be used on the Mystic Cube to earn even more rewards. These rewards include repair data that can be traded to unlock music tracks and cosmetic items for the party. The Marhen Garden is not the most vital piece of story-related content, but it certainly has its purpose in the narrative and there's major incentives here. For example, there's post-game floors, 2 more playable characters, and more story content after clearing the main story. The dungeon also lets you utilize over 15 characters, so you can build your Calvert Dream Team and grind as much as you want to make your favorite character stronger than ever. This includes Ren Bright, Shizuna Ren Mitsurugi, and Swin and Nadia, just to name a few. The Marhen Garden comes with the introduction of skill stones, which are used to improve crafts and S-crafts for each character. Skill stones are only available in the dungeon from chest and the Mystic Cube, so completing floors and grinding is the name of the game if you want to maximize each character's combat potential. Using skill stones can improve craft power, reduce craft delay, and boost other attributes, such as maximum HP or accuracy. Some upgrades are locked behind level requirements, including reaching levels 25 and 50, so there's plenty of progress and growth to be made over the course of the game. Trails to Daybreak 2 is upwards of 80 hours long or more, depending on how you approach the Marhen Garden in these upgrades. Grinding can be off-putting for some, but fortunately, the game does offer easier difficulty options for players wanting to prioritize the story. With recipes making a return, the Gourmet Points system also makes a comeback with permanent stat boosts for eating food and leveling up. Similarly, leveling up connections with each party members and notable NPCs via connection events and movie screenings will grant permanent bonuses as well. The connection events are really great, and at times bring more context to the story, so they're worth doing. Trails Through Daybreak 2 finally brings back minigames, which were greatly missed by fans who spent a lot of time in Trails in a Reverie. One of the most notable additions is fishing, and it's back in all its glory, with some improvements, and you can track the probability of catching fish, including those you haven't caught yet. The hacking minigame is one of the most prominent, since many locked chests in the world will require you to complete it in a time limit in order to gain rewards. In hacking, Mare or Fio will traverse a virtual maze, input codes, and avoid enemy AI on the way to checkpoints and the goal. This minigame is really straightforward and nothing to write home about, but I do think it's an interesting new addition nonetheless. 7 Hearts takes the place of Vantage Masters, but it's not as heavily featured throughout the game as the latter once was in Trails in the Reverie. In 7 Hearts, you essentially play a Trails version of Uno with an elemental twist. As a result, it's not as in-depth or competitive as Vantage Masters, so it won't be taking up much screen time either. This also applies to the one-on-one minigame, which is basically a short game of basketball where one character attempts to make 3-pointers while the other defends. There's so much to Trails Through Daybreak 2 that's worth mentioning, and this includes the achievements system. I came close to earning all the achievements in Trails Through Daybreak on my first playthrough, and I will say, there's quite a lot of them in the sequel. The rewards are much better this time too, with some including dual arts plugins, drivers, and skill stones. Completionists should have a field day with this, as there's so much to unlock by doing everything you can. One element that takes a back seat in Trails Through Daybreak 2 is the alignment system, which was a crucial part of the previous game. Unfortunately, it just doesn't have the same importance here, as it's mainly tied to the many 4 SPGs that are available to complete. I do think the alignment system served its purpose in the main story last time, but the time mechanic taking center stage here definitely gives good reason for it not to be as prominent now. The ability to choose outcomes for 4 SPGs is still present, and I thought the side quests were really engaging for the most part. There's also a tailing mechanic similar to the one from Ryuga Gotoku's Judgment series. I thought this was a surprising addition that adds some stakes to both 4 SPGs and certain main quests, and it makes Van feel more like that roguish Spriggan he's meant to be. It's subtle at first, but Trails to Daybreak 2 is a more optimized and vibrant game than its predecessor. You will especially notice those details on character models, especially in the many storied cutscenes that play out. Some of Trails to Daybreak 2's music, which was composed by the talented Falcom sound team JDK, sounds grungier to fit the darker narrative. Other tracks sound like they take some inspiration from the Science Adventure series, including the theme that plays whenever you have to go back in time. With the exception of a few text errors in the prologue not lining up with character speech, Nipponichi Software America's localization is really great too. There will be a Day 1 patch that addresses this issue and fixes other lingering issues with the Steam version, but the 1.0 release is almost flawless on PS5. The features fans know and love from recent Trails releases, such as Turbo Mode, are also back without problems as well. It seems like with each subsequent Trails release, it's becoming more difficult to find or point out flaws in the localization or port, and I think that bodes well for the franchise's future. Going into Trails to Daybreak 2, I already expected the game to be more character-focused with many different character arcs and stories having a presence here. I was expecting the sequel's narrative to not escalate to the heights that Trails to Daybreak reached naturally, but I was still thoroughly impressed with what Trails to Daybreak 2 achieves. Once more, the usage of the time mechanic was great and led to some really crazy developments in the story. I enjoy seeing the Reverie crew's story finally progress and intertwine with that of Arkwright Solutions. The story of the Crimson Grendel and the Red Hollow is dark and intriguing, and the many aspects tied to that continue the epic world building that Trails is known for. In fact, this game continues to tie the Calvert arc to the greater, overarching narrative of Trails that has been ongoing for 2 decades, and that's one of the key things it needed to do. Moreover, the amount of content and the way that it's presented in Trails to Daybreak 2 kept me hooked for nearly 100 hours. Whether it's the fast-paced prologue or the slow simmering fragments chapter, there's so much to this game that caught my attention and kept it without feeling like a step down from Trails to Daybreak. From beginning to end, Trails to Daybreak 2 is a wild ride. It takes many routes, and there's so much to experience, including moments those characters didn't want to see. Trails to Daybreak 2 is a really great RPG, and it's a sequel worth playing if you've played Daybreak and have caught up to the series. From its tried and true combat system to a roster of diverse and compelling characters, Trails to Daybreak 2 shows that Falcom can't miss with its sequels, and Nipponichi Software America is doing well to catch us all up with the series. Final Weapon is giving The Legend of Heroes, Trails to Daybreak 2 a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Nipponichi Software America provided a PS5 copy of The Legend of Heroes Trails to Daybreak 2 to Final Weapon for review purposes. The Legend of Heroes Trails to Daybreak 2 launches on February 14th for Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, PlayStation 5, and PC via Steam, GOG, and Epic Game Store in the West.